A struggling musician's life takes a shocking turn when a single phone call leads him to a powerful billionaire who might be his father. But buried secrets, past rejections, and a heartbreaking reunion threaten to shatter everything before it begins. This is a story of regret, hope, and redemption you won't want to miss. Subscribe now and stay tuned for an emotional journey that will keep you hooked until the very last scene.
Tunde was only 26, but music had been his heartbeat for as long as he could remember. He wrote songs every night, strummed his old guitar until his fingers ached, and sang in small bars for coins that barely bought him a meal. Still, he believed in one thing. One day, the right person would hear him, and his life would change forever. For months, that right person had a name: Kelvin Cole. Kelvin was more than just one of the richest men in the country. He was a giant in the entertainment industry, owning record labels, television stations, music distribution platforms, and even a chain of concert arenas. He had discovered some of the country's biggest stars. If Kelvin liked your music, your career wasn't just starting, it was exploding. But getting close to Kelvin was like trying to touch the moon. Tunde had waited outside his skyscraper office more times than he could count. Sometimes he stood under the hot sun for hours, only for the receptionist to tell him Kelvin wasn't in. Sometimes security guards smirked and told him to stop wasting his time. But Tunde never stopped trying. Then, one morning, his phone rang. "Mr. Cole has a free slot tomorrow. 10 minutes only," Kelvin's secretary said. Tunde almost dropped the phone. 10 minutes. That was all he needed. He could already imagine it, Kelvin listening, smiling, then saying the words he had dreamed about for years: "Welcome to my label." That night, Tunde didn't sleep. He kept practicing the song he wanted Kelvin to hear. He imagined the billionaire clapping for him, signing him on the spot. The next day, he arrived 2 hours early, wearing his best shirt and carrying his guitar like it was made of gold. Kelvin's office was on the top floor of a glass tower that overlooked the entire city. The reception smelled of expensive cologne, and the walls were lined with gold records and photos of Kelvin with famous artists. When Tunde entered, Kelvin was seated behind a huge desk, dressed in a sharp gray suit. The city skyline glittered behind him through the floor-to-ceiling windows, but his face was tight and unreadable. What Tunde didn't know was that Kelvin was having one of the worst mornings of his year. Just an hour earlier, an old business rival had mocked him during an online conference meeting. The insult had been sharp and personal. "All this wealth, but no child to inherit it. Your empire dies with you." Kelvin smiled politely at the event, but inside, the words had cut deep. His marriage to Clara, beautiful but cold, had been childless for 12 years. It was his greatest wound, one he kept buried under layers of work. But this morning, the wound felt raw. So when Tunde walked in, bright-eyed and hopeful, Kelvin's patience was already paper-thin. "Yes, you're the musician?" Kelvin asked flatly. "Yes, sir," Tunde said, his voice shaking. "I've written something I think you'll—" Kelvin raised a hand. "I don't have time for this today." Tunde froze. "But sir, if you could just listen." Kelvin snapped, his tone colder now. "Go do something useful with your life." He turned back to the papers on his desk as if Tunde wasn't even there. The words hit Tunde like a blow. He stood for a moment, his mouth dry, unsure if he'd heard right. Kelvin didn't look up again. Security came and gently led him out. Tunde walked out of the skyscraper in silence, his guitar still in hand. The streets outside seemed louder and harsher than before. On the bus ride home, he stared out the window, replaying Kelvin's voice in his head. "Go do something useful with your life." By the time he reached his small apartment, the excitement he had carried for months was gone. He placed his guitar in the corner and didn't touch it for the rest of the day. For the first time since chasing his dream, He felt truly unsure. But somewhere deep inside, a quiet voice still whispered, "Don't give up yet."
Kelvin Cole had everything the world said should make a man happy. Private jets, a sprawling mansion in Banana Island, a fleet of luxury cars, and the kind of influence that could make or break careers with a single phone call. But when the laughter in his home had been replaced by an unsettling silence, all his wealth began to feel like an expensive cage. He was married to Clara, a woman of striking beauty and elegance. She had been his companion through charity galas, high-profile award shows, and international business trips. To the outside world, they were a perfect couple. But behind the polished smiles, Clara was cold and distant. She barely touched him anymore. Perhaps it was the years of unsuccessful attempts at having children. Doctors had delivered the final verdict: no possibility, no hope. The news had been a slow poison. Kelvin buried himself in work, filling his days with meetings, contracts, and expansion plans. But at night, the stillness in their massive bedroom would hit him hard. There would be no small feet running across the marble floors, no child to call him Dad, no heir to inherit his empire when he was gone. He sometimes lay awake staring at the ceiling, haunted by the question, what was it all for? Kelvin's empire hadn't been handed to him on a silver platter. Years ago, he was just another struggling event promoter in Lagos, hustling to book local artists for small clubs. He learned the entertainment industry's dark corners, the broken promises, the underhanded deals, the betrayals. But Kelvin had vision. He understood marketing like few others did. In just a decade, he built a record label that signed Africa's biggest stars, expanded into film production, and eventually became the largest entertainment conglomerate in the country. His rise was filled with bold moves, mortgaging his only house to fund a video clip, convincing a top international artist to collaborate with an unknown Nigerian singer, and investing heavily in digital streaming before anyone else believed in it. These risks turned him into a billionaire before he was 40, but they also made him hard, impatient, and unwilling to tolerate what he saw as weakness or wasted time. That hardness showed itself a few weeks ago when a young man came into his office without an appointment. The boy couldn't have been more than 26, clutching a battered guitar case and a crumpled demo CD. Kelvin had been in the middle of a video conference with some business colleagues, still simmering from a stinging remark he had overheard earlier that morning about his childless state. The insult had been gnawing at him all day, souring his mood. So when the musician stepped in, full of hope and ready to speak, Kelvin cut him off after barely 10 seconds. His words were curt, his tone colder than usual, and with a quick gesture, he ordered security to escort the young man out, because he needed somewhere to pour the frustration he had been holding in. At the time, he justified it. I can't see everyone who walks in off the street. But something about the boy's eyes, a mix of desperation and hope, kept coming back to Kelvin in quiet moments. He remembered the slight tremble in the boy's voice, the way his fingers tightened protectively around that guitar case, as if it were his lifeline. Kelvin told himself he would find time to track him down, maybe give him 5 minutes to play. But his schedule was relentless. New projects launching, a court case to settle, an international award ceremony to attend. Days turned into weeks, and the boy's face became a ghost in his mind. One evening, as Kelvin sat alone in his expansive study overlooking the city lights, the memory hit him with unusual force. For reasons he couldn't explain, a deep regret stirred in his chest. The empire he had built was supposed to be for the next generation of dreamers, and yet he had turned one away without a second thought. That night he poured himself a glass of whiskey and stared at the framed photos of his younger self, the ambitious dreamer who had once been desperate for just one chance. And in that quiet, Kelvin realized that the emptiness in his life wasn't just because he had no child. It was because somewhere along the way, he had stopped nurturing dreams, both his own and those of others.
Tunde's life in the neighborhood was a quiet war, a constant battle between his dreams and the harsh reality of poverty. Every morning he woke to the faint wheeze of his mother's breathing from the small bed across their single-room home. Ada, once strong and lively, now moved slowly, her body weakened by years of labor and illness. Tunde brewed her tea, helped her sit up, and made sure she took her medicine before heading out for the day. There was no luxury in his life, just routine and responsibility. He took whatever work he could find, carrying goods for shop owners, cleaning the stalls at the market, washing cars for impatient customers. The pay was always small, barely enough to cover food and medicine. But each night, no matter how tired he was, Tunde returned to his corner of the room, pulled out his guitar, and wrote songs. Music was his escape. When his fingers moved along the strings, the noise of the neighborhood faded. The shouting of hawkers, the loud quarrels of neighbors, the endless arguments over money. In his songs there was hope, love, and a world where dreams could come true. He believed that if someone important just listened, really listened, they would hear the soul in his voice and know he was worth investing in. But the neighborhood didn't share his belief. "Music won't feed you, Tunde," one elderly neighbor said, shaking her head as she passed. Another, less kind, called out, "Go get a real job before you starve to death." The mocking wasn't just from strangers. His own friends teased him cruelly. "You're chasing a dream that will kill you," one of them laughed over a bottle of cheap beer. "Why beg the billionaire? Your own father didn't want you, so why would a stranger help?" That last line always stung the most. His father, or rather, the absence of one. Tunde had never known him. Ada never spoke about the man, except to say, "He didn't want us." That was all. No name, no explanation. It was the unspoken wound that shaped his life. Without a father, Tunde felt like half of him was missing. Still, he told himself it didn't matter. He didn't need anyone's pity, only a chance to prove himself. In his quiet moments, he would think about the big glass buildings in the city, the shining lights of concerts, the stages where famous musicians stood while crowds sang along. He imagined himself there, his mother sitting proudly in the front row, smiling through tears as the world finally saw him for who he was. That's why meeting Kelvin Cole had mattered so much. Kelvin wasn't just rich. He owned record labels, TV channels, and talent agencies. If anyone could open the door to Tunde's future, it was him. And after months of waiting outside that towering office building, Tunde had finally been granted an appointment. He had walked in with hope so bright that it drowned out the doubts in his mind. And yet, in less than a minute, it had all been crushed under Kelvin's cold dismissal. Still, Tunde couldn't let the dream die. He couldn't. Ada's medicines were getting more expensive, and her health was getting worse. If music could give them a better life, then no insult, no rejection, and no poverty could keep him from trying again. Some nights, as he strummed the guitar quietly so his mother could sleep, he told himself the same words over and over, a promise whispered into the darkness. "One day, they'll hear me. One day, they'll know my name."
The evening was heavy with the smell of rain. The tin roof above the small room rattled as water began to fall in slow, steady drops. Tunde sat beside his mother's bed, gently fanning her as she coughed into a handkerchief. Ada's face was pale, her breathing shallow, but her eyes, tired though they were, stayed fixed on him. "Tunde," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Yes, Mama." He leaned closer, worried. She hesitated, her thin fingers fidgeting with the edge of the bedsheet. "There's something I should have told you a long time ago. Something I kept hidden because I thought it would protect you. But maybe I was wrong." Tunde frowned. "Mama, you don't have to." "No, I should have. I don't know how much longer I have." The words made his chest tighten. Ada took a slow, shaky breath before continuing. When I was 19, I met a young man. His name was Kelvin. He was charming, ambitious, full of dreams. I thought he loved me. But when I told him I was pregnant, he denied the baby, told me it's not mine, and walked away." Her voice cracked on the last words. Tunde felt as though the room had gone still. He stared at her, his mind struggling to process. "I never chased him. I didn't know where he went, and honestly, I didn't want to beg him to stay. I raised you on my own, Tunde. Every meal, every school fee, every night I worked late, it was just me." She paused to cough, covering her mouth with the handkerchief before reaching under her pillow. Her hand emerged holding something small and worn, an old, faded photograph. She placed it in Tunde's hands. The photo showed a young Ada, her hair in neat braids, smiling beside a tall, handsome boy. His arm was around her shoulder, his grin full of confidence. But what froze Tunde's breath wasn't the smile. It was the face. He knew that face. The sharp jawline, the confident eyes, it was Kelvin Cole. Not the older, cold billionaire he had met weeks ago, but a younger version. The resemblance was unmistakable. "Mama," Tunde's voice shook. "This Kelvin, are you saying—" "Yes, he's your father." For a moment, Tunde couldn't move. The sound of the rain grew louder, pounding against the roof like a drum. His thoughts were a whirlpool. The memory of Kelvin's dismissive words, "Go do something useful with your life," now twisting into something far more personal. It all fit. The similarity in names, the unmistakable face in the photograph. The man who had shut the door in his face wasn't just a stranger who didn't believe in his talent. He was the father who had abandoned him before he even took his first breath. Tunde's stomach churned with a strange mixture of anger, disbelief, and a hurt so deep it felt like it reached his bones. "Why didn't you tell me before?" he asked quietly. Ada's eyes filled with tears. "Because I didn't want you to grow up hating him. I thought maybe if you didn't know, you could just live your life without that weight. But now I think you deserve the truth. Whatever you do with it is up to you." Tunde sat back staring at the photograph again. Kelvin Cole, the billionaire, the man with the power to change lives, had refused to even listen to his music, not knowing the young man standing before him was his own son. The rain outside turned into a downpour, but inside, Tunde's world had gone eerily silent.
Tunde couldn't sleep that night. He lay on his bed staring at the cracked ceiling, the faded photograph clutched in his hand like a lifeline. The face in the picture, younger, brighter, but undeniably the same, belonged to Kelvin Cole, the man who had so easily dismissed him just weeks earlier. Could it really be possible? Could the country's most powerful entertainment mogul be his father? His thoughts raced. What if I'm wrong? What if it's just a strange coincidence? But every time he compared the photograph to the Kelvin he had met now, the certainty grew stronger. The same eyes, the same sharp jawline, even the same half-smile, though the man he knew now rarely smiled at all. Excitement bubbled in his chest, quickly chased by fear. If it's true, what then? Would he even care? Would he accept me, or would he push me away again? The questions swirled in his mind until he finally sat up. He had to find out. He couldn't just keep this to himself. The next morning, he put on the cleanest shirt he owned and headed back to Kelvin's towering glass headquarters. He rehearsed what he would say. "Sir, I think you might be my father." Or maybe, "We need to talk, it's important." By the time he reached the front desk, his palms were damp with sweat. The receptionist looked up from her computer. "Good morning. I'm here to see Mr. Cole. Please tell him it's Tunde, from last time," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. She typed something quickly, then shook her head. "I'm sorry, Mr. Cole's schedule is full. No walk-ins. If you want, you can leave a message." Tunde leaned forward. "Please, this is personal, very personal. Just tell him I have information about his past." The woman gave him a polite but firm smile. "I'm sorry, sir. That's not possible." It was the same brick wall he had hit before. No matter how much he pleaded, she wouldn't budge. He walked out of the building slowly, each step heavier than the last. But he wasn't ready to give up. Back home, Tunde sat at his small wooden desk and pulled out his phone. He opened Kelvin's official social media page. He had never dared message him before. It felt impossible that someone like Kelvin would read it. But now it was his only shot. His fingers hovered over the keyboard before he finally began to type. "This was you and my mother. We need to talk." He attached the photograph, his hands trembling as he selected Send. For a long moment, he stared at the screen, his heart pounding. The message was marked as sent, but there was no reply. Hours passed. He refreshed the page over and over, each time hoping to see Seen appear beneath his message. It never did. Outside, the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the room. Ada called from the bedroom, her voice weak, asking if he had eaten. "I'm fine, Mama," he called back, though the truth was he hadn't touched food all day. That night, lying in the darkness, Tunde imagined Kelvin seeing the photograph. Would he make him pause? Would he remember? Or would he just scroll past, the way powerful men often ignored anything that didn't serve them? The uncertainty gnawed at him, but one thing was clear. He couldn't let this go. If Kelvin wouldn't answer, Tunde would find another way. Somehow, some way, he would make him listen. Kelvin was getting desperate and worried. Recently, he had been losing the taste for everything that had once defined him. The drive that had carried him from a struggling street performer to one of the most powerful men in the entertainment industry was fading. Music deals, television contracts, multi-million naira endorsements, none of it excited him anymore. He began avoiding high-profile business appointments, leaving trusted aides to represent him. His face, once a regular feature on magazine covers and red carpets, had started disappearing from the public eye. He shielded himself from events, cameras, and the endless handshakes that used to give him a thrill. Even his social media, which he once used to engage fans, scout new talents, and flaunt his latest projects, now lay dormant. He barely glanced at it except when absolutely necessary. His wife, Clara, noticed the change immediately. She had her own sadness to deal with. The years of failed attempts to conceive had left her emotionally raw, but Kelvin's recent detachment was something different. Sometimes she would pass by his study and see him sitting there, motionless, staring at nothing. No music playing, no phone calls, no urgency, just silence. Clara didn't know what to say anymore. She had tried words of encouragement. She had tried giving him space. Nothing worked. Then, one long, quiet afternoon, Kelvin sat in his leather armchair with a tumbler of untouched whiskey on the table beside him. Out of pure boredom, he picked up his phone. He scrolled through headlines, checked the stock prices of his companies, and half-heartedly looked at emails. Then, against his usual habit, he opened his social media messages. It was the same as always, hundreds of unread requests, business proposals from strangers, young artists begging for a chance, random people asking for money. He scrolled lazily, ready to close the app, when something caught his eye. A message from a name he didn't recognize, and an attached photo. He almost swiped past it, but the image froze him in place. Kelvin leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. The picture was old, faded at the edges, but there was no mistaking it. It was him, a much younger him, maybe 19 or 20, wearing a cheap t-shirt and a crooked smile. Beside him was a girl, Ada. For a moment his mind went blank. Then the memories started flooding back. Ada, the quiet, pretty teenager from his old neighborhood, the one who believed in him back when no one else did, the one who used to sneak out to watch him perform at tiny bars, and the one who, one day, had told him she was pregnant. Kelvin remembered exactly where they had been standing, the panic that had risen in his chest, the words he had said, cold, selfish, and final. It's not mine." He had walked away and never looked back. Now, decades later, here was her face again, frozen in time next to his own. His eyes drifted down to the short message that came with the photo. "This was you and my mother. We need to talk." Kelvin's heart pounded. Who was this person? Could they be? No, it was impossible. Or was it? He stared at the words again. The tone wasn't begging or threatening, just direct, and it carried a weight that unsettled him. For the first time in months, he felt something other than numbness. It wasn't joy, exactly, nor was it fear. It was a strange, electric mix of both. Part of him wanted to delete the message and bury the memory of Ada once again, but another part, the part that had been quietly restless for years, whispered that he needed to know. Hadn't she once told him she was pregnant? Back then he had denied it could be his. Had she been telling the truth? Could she have had the child? The thought sent a strange rush through him, excitement tangled with regret. Regret for words he now feared had been cruel, unfair, and maybe unforgivable. He sat there for a long time, the phone still in his hand, his mind racing through possibilities. Finally, he reached for the landline on his desk and dialed his secretary's number. "Angela," he said when she picked up. His voice had a firmness she hadn't heard from him in weeks. "Yes, sir? I'm sending you some details. The sender of this message. Find him. I don't care what it takes. Get me an appointment with him as soon as possible." Angela hesitated. "Sir, may I ask—" "Just do it," Kelvin interrupted, his tone leaving no room for questions. When the call ended, Kelvin sat back in his chair and studied the photo again. He couldn't decide whether to feel relief or dread, but one thing was certain. For the first time in a long time, business wasn't the only thing on his mind. And maybe, just maybe, that was a sign his life was about to change.
Tunde couldn't believe it. It had been over a week since he sent that message to Kelvin Cole, the billionaire, the man he now suspected might be his father. He had attached the old, faded photograph of Kelvin and his mother Ada as teenagers, hoping it would spark recognition. But nothing happened. The message sat there, marked as sent but never seen. At first, Tunde checked every hour, staring at the screen like his life depended on it. But as the days dragged on, hope began to fade. He stopped opening the app altogether. A heaviness settled over him. Even if Kelvin was his father, why would he care? This was the man who denied him before he was even born. The man who, just weeks ago, had looked him in the eye and told him to do something useful with his life. Why would someone like that suddenly want a son? Especially a son from the streets? Perhaps it was fate, Tunde thought bitterly. Perhaps their paths were never meant to cross. The guitar in the corner, once his most prized possession, now gathered dust. His fingers no longer itched to strum its strings. His voice, once so eager to sing, now stayed silent. For the first time in years, he didn't see himself as a musician. He didn't see himself as anything. Maybe the neighbors were right. Music wouldn't feed him. Dreams wouldn't heal his mother. Perhaps it was time to find a real job and forget this fantasy. He sat in his small room one evening, staring at the peeling paint on the wall. The streets outside buzzed with their usual chaos, shouting vendors, honking cars, and the distant sound of laughter that seemed to come from a different world entirely. Tunde felt like he was slowly fading into the background of his own life. Then his phone rang. The sound startled him. He glanced at the screen, expecting another spam call, or maybe one of his friends asking to borrow money he didn't have. But the number was unfamiliar. "Hello?" he said cautiously. A crisp, professional voice replied. "Am I speaking with Mr. Tunde?" "Yes, this is Tunde. This is Mr. Cole's office. Can you make it for an appointment with Mr. Kelvin tomorrow morning?" Tunde froze. He wasn't sure he had heard right. "I'm sorry, did you say Kelvin Cole?" "Yes, Mr. Cole would like to meet with you. 10 a.m. sharp. Can I confirm your availability?" His heart was pounding so loudly it almost drowned out the voice on the other end. After a long pause, he finally said, Yes, I can make it." "Good. Our office will send you the details. Please be on time." The call ended, but Tunde sat there, the phone still in his hand, staring into space. He had imagined this moment so many times, but now that it was real, it didn't feel the way he thought it would. Instead of excitement, a wave of nervousness washed over him. How was he going to face the billionaire again, the man who had rejected him twice in a lifetime? And more importantly, how would he convince him that he could be his son? Questions swirled in his mind, each one heavier than the last. He didn't know what Kelvin wanted. Was it curiosity, guilt, or just a polite gesture before shutting the door forever? As the night stretched on, Tunde lay awake, the appointment looming over him like a storm cloud. Tomorrow, everything could change. Or nothing could change at all.
Tunde nervously stepped into the magnificent glass building that bore the Coal Enterprise's name. Its polished marble floors gleamed under the bright lights, and the air smelled faintly of expensive cologne and fresh flowers. He had barely slept the night before. The possibility that Kelvin Cole, the billionaire, could be his father was a thought he could not shake. It filled him with hope, but also with fear. What if Kelvin rejected him again? What if this meeting ended like the last time, with him being told to leave? That morning, he had done his best to look presentable. His shirt was neatly pressed, his shoes shined as much as they could be. Before leaving, he told his mother about his mission. Ada had simply nodded, her eyes soft but worried. "If things get beyond your control," she had said, "just tell him to come see me." Kelvin, on the other hand, was also anticipating the meeting. He was curious about the stranger who had sent him the photograph that had brought back memories of Ada, memories he thought he had buried decades ago. He wanted to know how she was faring. He wanted to know if she had kept the child, and if that child could possibly be his. When Tunde was finally shown into the spacious corner office, his breath caught in his throat. The walls were lined with shelves of awards, framed photographs with world leaders, and large windows overlooking the city skyline. Behind the sleek desk sat Kelvin Cole himself, the man whose face had haunted Tunde's thoughts for weeks. Kelvin's eyes widened slightly as he studied the young man. He recognized him almost immediately. Wasn't this the same boy who had barged into his office weeks ago, eager to display his music? Was this some elaborate trick just to get a second meeting after being turned away? But then Tunde reached into his pocket and pulled out the worn, faded photograph. His hands trembled slightly as he placed it on the desk. "My mother told me," Tunde began, slowly, his voice tight with emotion, "that this man could be my father." Kelvin's gaze dropped to the photo. There he was, barely out of his teens, standing beside a smiling Ada. The memory hit him like a wave. He looked back up, his voice low. "Your mother is Ada?" "Yes," Tunde said, his eyes locking onto Kelvin's. "You told me you rejected us when I was still in her belly." Kelvin felt a strange twist in his chest. Could it be true? Had he dismissed his own son just a few weeks ago without realizing it? "I didn't know," Kelvin started, but the words felt thin. "You told me to leave last time we met. You didn't even let me speak. Do you know how that felt, to be turned away twice, once before I was born, and again now?" Kelvin leaned back in his chair, his mind a whirl of emotions, regret, shock, a strange flicker of hope. If what Tunde said was true, then this was no stranger. This could be his son, the heir he thought he would never have. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Kelvin's eyes stayed fixed on the photograph, while Tunde waited, his heart pounding in his chest. Finally, Kelvin looked up. His voice was quieter now, almost careful. "I need to see your mother." Tunde nodded. "She wants to see you too." Somewhere deep inside, Kelvin felt something shift, a mixture of guilt for the past, excitement for what might be, and hope that it wasn't too late to make things right.
Kelvin stood in the doorway, his heart heavy as he looked at Ada. She lay propped up on pillows, her once vibrant frame now thin and frail. Her hair, streaked with gray, framed a face lined with years of quiet struggle. Yet her eyes, Those same eyes that had once lit up his youth still held a flicker of strength. He swallowed hard. Guilt gripped him like a vice. How many years had she carried the weight of raising their son alone? While he had built a business empire, she had worked herself to the bone just to put food on the table. And then, the thought that made his chest ache most. Only a few weeks ago, he had turned his back on Tunde without even listening to him. Kelvin stepped closer, his voice trembling. Ada, I was a coward back then. I had the means to give you and our son the best life, but instead, I walked away. Ada's lips curved into a small, tired smile. The past is the past, Kelvin. No, he said firmly, his voice cracking. I won't hide behind that excuse anymore. I wronged you, I wronged him. He turned toward Tunde, who stood silently by the bedside, watching them both. I'm asking, no, I'm begging for your forgiveness, for both of you to let me make things right. Ada's gaze softened, but she said nothing. She looked at Tunde instead, as if giving him the choice. Tunde took a deep breath. You hurt us, twice, but I can't change the fact that you're my father. If you mean what you say, then prove it, not with money, but with presence. Kelvin nodded, a tear slipping down his cheek. You have my word. From this day, I'll take responsibility for both of you, and the world will know you're my son. Weeks later, Kelvin made good on his promise. At a press conference crowded with flashing cameras, he stood beside Tunde. This is my son, Tunde Cole, my heir, my family. The news spread like wildfire. But the most powerful moment came not in a boardroom, nor under the glare of journalists, but under the bright lights of a concert stage. Tunde was about to perform at his first major concert, a dream he had chased against all odds. The crowd was electric, chanting his name. Backstage, Kelvin approached him, not as a sponsor or benefactor, but as a father. You nervous? Kelvin asked with a smile. Tunde grinned faintly. A little, but I think I'm ready. Kelvin placed a hand on his shoulder. I almost lost you before I even knew you. Never again. When Tunde walked out onto the stage, the cheers were deafening. His friends who had once mocked him now tried to shake his hand, slap his back, and act as if they had always believed in him. None of them could quite believe that the same boy they had teased was now publicly recognized as Kelvin Cole's son. Tunde stepped to the microphone. This one, he said, is for my mother, the strongest person I know, and for everyone who's ever felt forgotten. It's called Found. As the first chords filled the arena, Kelvin stood in the front row, his eyes glistening. Every lyric, every note carried the weight of years lost and the promise of years ahead. And as the crowd swayed and sang along, the screen faded to black, leaving the image of a son who had finally been claimed, a father who had finally come home, and a mother whose love had carried them both to this moment.